Hello, in this lecture we're going to work some shorter test type problems that could be in the format of multiple choice questions. So the first one we have, a company's flexible budget for 44,000 units of production showed a variable overhead cost of 57,200, fixed overhead costs of 60,000. The company incurred overhead costs of 105,640 while operating at a volume of 36,000. The total controllable cost variance is what? So when we talk about cost variance, what happens, we're basically saying, okay, we budgeted something to happen, then something actually did happen, and we need to compare what we budgeted to happen to what actually happened. So I'm going to start off with what actually happened. We know what happened. We know what the actual total overhead was. So we have actual total overhead. I'm going to start that out here so we have some space to calculate, and we know that the company incurred overhead costs of 105,640. So that's what actually happened. We're going to compare that to what we budgeted to happen. There's two types of costs we're going to deal with. One is variable costs that were budgeted, and then we're going to have fixed costs that were budgeted. Now, when we think about variable costs, we know they change per unit. So they didn't give us a cost per unit here. What they did give us is they told us what they estimated the variable costs to be as a total. So this is the budgeted variable costs. The total budgeted variable costs then they thought was going to be 57.2. That's not what actually happened. That's the budget. And then budgeted units that we thought we were going to produce was the 44,000. We actually produced 36, but we thought we were going to produce the 44. That's what we're going to use in our budget. Therefore, the variable cost per unit that was budgeted for was going to be equal to the 57,200, that's the total variable cost, divided by the 44,000. I'm going to select Control Enter. It's not 1, of course, because that's rounded with no decimals. So I'm going to go to the Home tab, I'm going to go to the numbers, and I'm going to increase decimals, and that'll give us the 130. So $1.30, the 57.2 divided by the 44,000, that gives us that $1.30. So now we're going to multiply that times what actually happened in terms of units. So actual units. The actual units that happened aren't the 44. The actual units produced were the 36. So we're going to take that 36,000 and that will give us the total variable cost that was budgeted here. So we're going to say that equals, well, the total variable cost that we're calculating. The 130 times the 36,000, that's what we're going to say our variable cost portion is. Now, if you wanted to make this a little bit nicer, just to clean it up, I'm going to go ahead and indent this so you might be able to see it a little bit better. We don't have to do this when a quick calculation that we were working if we were working a test question, but I'm going to indent these and so that you could see that that's the last information that we got there in terms of total variable cost. So the next portion, of course, is the fixed cost, and that was given in the problem. So I'm just going to put that right underneath the variable cost because that was given, and that's going to be 60,000. Why is it given? Because it doesn't change. The fixed cost is pretty easy. It's just going to be, it is what it is. So the variable cost plus the fixed cost will give us the total flexible budget. And it's flexible because of this change with the variable cost that was changing with the units of production. From the 44, we changed it to align with the 36,000 units that were actually produced. That's why it's basically flexible. We can add these two up now. I'm going to put aligning in the outer column so it aligns with the actual total overhead. So we're going to say we got the 46.8 plus the 60 here. And then if we take the difference, this is what was going to be budgeted to happen. This is what happened actually in terms of what actually happened. So we could see that the actual thing that happened is less than what we budgeted to happen. And when that's the case, it's going to be a favorable difference because we performed better. We had a lower cost than we thought was going to happen based on this flexible budget. Next one says the company collected the following data regarding production of one of its products. Compute the direct labor rate variance. So we have the direct labor standard, which is 2 hours at $12.75 an hour, and that's going to be $25.50 per finished unit. Then we have the actual direct labor hours, which was 72,100. Actual finished units produced 35,000. Actual cost of direct labor 972.5. So once again, we're looking for that variance, so we're trying to see what the change is going to be from what we budgeted to happen and what actually happened. And we're trying to break that change out between the difference in rate and the difference in hours in this case that would have resulted in the total change in the difference between the total budgeted amount for wages on the production. So the most straightforward way to do this is to take the actual cost, and the actual cost they gave us to be this 9725. So we can take the 9725 and we want to compare that to the actual hours. So the actual hours are going to be here. They gave us the actual hours direct labor 72100, and we need to multiply the actual hours times the standard rate. So we're using not the rate that actually happened, we're taking the actual hours times the standard rate, and that up here is the $12.75. So 12.75, and I'm going to add some decimals. I'm going to go back on here, go to the Home tab, Numbers, add decimals, and then we're going to go over here and we're going to calculate the 72.1 times the standard rate, the actual hours times the standard rate. That equals the 72.1 times the 12.75, and that will give us the 919.275. And if we take the difference between the 972.5 minus the 919.275, we get the 53.220. Now this is what actually happened. This is what was budgeted to happen. So what actually happened is higher. So this is an unfavorable difference. Now some of you might be thinking that there's another way. There's other way we can calculate this. Oftentimes I think about calculate this as the difference between the two rates times the actual hours that were produced. And you could figure it out this way with the data, that the way the data has been given. This would be a more roundabout way, but it's possible to take the the budgeted rate that we have here, and that's going to be the 1275.75. I'm going to add decimals to that. So I'm going to go to the Home tab. I'm going to go to Numbers. I'm going to add decimals. What I want to do is compare that to the actual rate. So I want to find the actual rate, and we got to kind of do some digging to find the actual rate if we were going to do that. So the actual rate per hour we're talking about. How can we calculate the actual rate? Well, we can have the actual cost, the total cost, which happens to be the 9725, the total cost, and then we can divide that by the actual hours. And the actual hours in this case was the 72.1, so that means the actual rate then would be the 972.5 divided by the 72.1. So that equals the total cost divided by the hours that were input. And then once again, I'm going to add the decimal to that. So I'm going to go over here in the tabs and add the decimal. So what we're doing, just to clean this up, we're going to put a colon there, and then we can indent these if we choose, like so. And I'm going to pull this out here just so we can see that. And then we can indent this one more time. And this way we can kind of compare, this is the difference in rates. So sometimes this is an easy way to see this. We budgeted the rate to be $12.75 per hour, and we actually paid $13.49 per hour. I'm going to once again go to the decimals, Home tab, decimals, add decimals. There's a difference of 74 cents per hour between what we budgeted to pay and what we actually paid. So we actually paid 74 cents higher. And then if we multiply that times the hours, the actual hours, we can see that this is the actual hours being 72.1. That will give us the difference here times this 72.1, and that'll give us our same number here. I like to make it green as here. So sometimes the way the problem will be set up, it'll be easier to do the math this way. Sometimes the math will be easier this way. Some people like to see it one way or the other, whichever works for you. The data's there. Next one says that a company has established 6 pounds of material at $2 per pound as the standard for the material in its product. The company has just produced 1,000 units of this product using 6,200 pounds of material that cost $11,480. The direct material quantity variance is what? So when we think about the difference, what happened to budget versus actual in terms of the production of quantity, and there's two things that we can look at, the cost, and we can look at the change in the quantity. Here we're focusing on the change in the quantity. So I'm going to start off with the actual quantity. The actual quantity that we budgeted to have, or the actual quantity that we did have at production, was the 6,200. That's how many pounds in units. We're not talking about dollars right now. We're talking about units. And then we want the budgeted quantity. That's what we're going to look for. What did we think was going to happen there? And when we think about the budgeted quantity, we have to say, okay, how many pounds per unit? Okay, per unit. And they told us that the pounds per unit are 6. So that's going to be the pounds per unit, and the company has just produced 1,000 units. So let's just say number of units is going to be 1,000. So that means that we had a budget, according to this, of it's going to take 6 pounds per unit, and we have 1,000 of them. So then we can compare. We can say, okay, well, how much? We're looking for the quantity difference here. So the quantity difference, and I could label this is the budget quantity without the colon. And if we want to clean this up, we can indent these, home tab, alignment, indent, and align this one out. And so if we were thinking about the change in the quantity, we're not talking about the change in price, what we actually paid versus what we budgeted to pay. We're looking at the change in quantity, and we're saying we budgeted at producing 1,000 units that it would cost 6,000, or it actually cost, 6,200. We budgeted it to cost at that level of production 6,000. Therefore, we have a difference of the 6,200 minus the 6,000. That could be the difference. That could be the variance. So that's the variance, 200. Now we need to multiply that times dollars. We need to get that from units to dollars. And in this case, we're going to take the budgeted units, the budgeted amount per unit, and multiply that times the difference, which was 2 in this case. Now again, you might get confused if they gave you more data and they told us if we wanted to figure out if they told us what the actual cost was, you get confused. Should we use the budgeted amount or the actual? We're going to use the budgeted, so it's 200 times the 2 for this $400 of unfavorable, because it took us more quantity than we thought under this budget, so it's unfavorable. And the reason we're using the budgeted dollar amount is because we want to have a separate calculation for the difference in how much we budgeted to pay for the material per unit, and we're going to do that as the separate part of the calculation in order to get the total difference for the material cost. So half of it has to do with the difference in how much material we used, half of it has to do with the difference in how much we paid per unit.